What I've come to realize is that learning is the most astonishing and wonderful thing that human beings have come up with. Learning makes us different from everything else in nature. Some bits of nature can do a little bit of learning, but not like human beings can do learning. And learning is the richest and most exciting thing we can do. The problem is that so many young people in the world today are locked out of learning. They're in school, they're being told things, they're acquiring knowledge, but they're not learning. And without that connection with learning, they're bored, disengaged, and not making progress. And our aim is to reconnect all those young people with the power of learning. And the way we have discovered to reconnect young people with the power of learning is through unlocking their creativity. The skills that creativity bring to young people, the skills they enhance in young people, are the very skills that improve learning and make their capacity to learn in school much more powerful. But why is this so important? It's important because the world is changing and the needs we have of young people as they become adults and enter the workforce are very different from the needs we had 100 years ago. And if we are going to successfully prepare young people for this new world, then we need to adapt the nature of our education and the skills and understandings we develop. And this is a point felt strongly by Andreas Schleicher, who's Director of Education for the OECD. And here he is talking about the relationship of creativity to learning at a recent conference in Durham University.
Everyone talks about creativity, but I think we came to realize only very recently that this is an agenda where education and culture play such a central role. In one way, the kind of industrial approach to schooling, where children were educated in batches of age and all go through the same standardized and prefabricated curriculum and instruction, it hasn't really been conducive to nurturing the kind of creativity and innovation that we need in this age of accelerations. Things have changed, and the dilemma for educators is now that the routine cognitive skills, the skills that are easiest to teach and easiest to test, are exactly the skills that are also easiest to digitize, to automate, and to outsource. While we could still assume that what we learn in school will last for a lifetime, routine cognitive skills were rightly at the center of education. But today, the world no longer rewards us just for what we know. Google knows everything, but for what we can do with what we know. Schools now need to prepare students for more rapid change than ever before, to learn for jobs that have not been created, to tackle social challenges that we can't yet imagine, and to use technologies that have not been invented. What I mean is that these days, we no longer know how things will unfold. Often we are surprised and we need to learn from the extraordinary. And sometimes we make mistakes along the way. And it will be often the mistakes and failures, when properly understood, that create the context for learning and for growth. And I might even go a step further. The ability to develop competencies is itself something to be learned, using reflection, anticipation, action. Reflective practice is needed to take a critical stance when deciding, choosing, acting, to step back from the established wisdom of our times and take a different perspective. Anticipation mobilizes cognitive skills such as analytical or critical thinking, to foresee what might be needed in the future or how actions that we take today might have consequences for the future. And both reflective practice and anticipation contribute to the willingness to take responsible actions, in the belief that it's within our own power that we can shape the course of events. Tomorrow's employees are probably going to work in very small organizations, using digital platforms to create new products and new services. And future jobs are likely to pair computer intelligence with the creative, social, and emotional skills, the attitudes and the values of human beings. It'll then be precisely our capacity for innovation, our awareness, and our sense of responsibility that will equip us to harness machines to shape the world for the better. So in whatever way you construct your list of 21st century skills, you'll always come across creativity in one or the other way. Creating new value as a transformative competency, bringing together the processes of creating, of making, of bringing into being and formulating, and looking for outcomes that are innovative, fresh, original, outcomes that contribute something of intrinsic positive worth. And creating new value suggests entrepreneurialism in the broader sense of being ready to venture, to try without anxiety about failure. This is all about imagination, inquisitiveness, persistence, collaboration, self-discipline.
The definition of creativity that Andreas finishes with in that video is one developed by Bill Lucas, Guy Claxton and Ellen Spencer for CCE 10 years ago. We needed a definition of creativity that artists, teachers, children and young people could understand, and the team from Winchester came up with the 5 habits of creative learning. They are to be inquisitive, persistent, imaginative, disciplined and collaborative, and developing these habits of learning in children and young people lies at the heart of all our international programs. We have learnt that these creative learning habits of mind remain valid across cultures and across continents because they are related to how we learn, which is true of all humans, and hence at the heart of the incredible diversity of children and young people across the world is a deep human commonality, creativity. And we have learnt that the learning environment that stimulates and develops our creativity is what we now call the high-functioning classroom, and you can see in the image. It is an environment in which children are challenged to think for themselves rather than give answers, where they are physically, socially and emotionally engaged, where the learning feels authentic and relevant to their lives, and their questions, interests and experiences shape the learning, where emotions are acknowledged and addressed, and where we learn to be deeply reflective. Now, we're not saying that the left-hand side is bad and the right-hand side is good. There are times that pupils just need to sit quietly, to listen, to take notes, and to absorb the information that you are telling them. The problem becomes if this passive way of learning becomes the only or the dominant teaching style in your classroom. The passive way does not engage young people properly in learning. It doesn't make them think actively, and it doesn't lead to active learning. And the characteristics on the right are those which do emphasize active learning. There's group work here because relationships are very important and you work on them in the classroom. It is part of learning to build relationships. The pupils building relationships between themselves, and also you, the teacher, building relationships with your children. It's a very physical way of working. There's a lot of movement involved in what we do. So movement around the classroom by the pupils, out of the classroom to other areas of the school, and even out of the school entirely. Emotion is recognized and is a central part of the learning. The way people are feeling is expressed and acknowledged and woven into the fabric of the learning that is going on. And the self is one of the main learning resources. And by this I mean that the children's own questions, their experiences and their examples actually become woven into the lesson itself. So rather than you, the teacher, set the questions, the pupils set the questions and they explore the answers in this process. Or if you're looking for examples in real life of the concepts that you are talking about, then those examples come from the children's lives as much as possible, and you find the opportunity for them to identify those examples within their own lives. And reflection is a very important part of what happens. Regularly you stop and you reflect on learning, and by inclusion what we mean here is that you design lessons in which every child has an entry point. In all classes now there's a range of ability, but you must design lessons that the most able will find a place to begin, but also the least able. And that is really important. As you look at your class, you should be able to say yourself, all the children are learning all of the time. That's the centerpiece of active learning. Now, all this is very abstract. And so I'd like to give you a practical example of a class that I gave, which incorporates these ideas so you can see what I mean. Now, I was working in India with a foundation and I observed a lesson given by an Indian teacher. And it was about electricity and circuits, light bulbs and batteries. And in the lesson that I observed, the pupils came in. They were divided into groups, and in each group, the pupils were given some equipment. They were given a little light bulb, they were given a battery, they were given some popsicles, they were given some grass, they were given some wires. And the teacher said, all right, take the bulb and the battery and connect the bulb to the battery with the popsicles. Does the light come on? And the pupils said no. He said, right, take the bulb and the battery and detach it using the grass. Long grass leaves. Does the bulb come on? The children said no. He said, right now, take the wires, attach them and to the bulb and the battery. Does it come on? Yes, it does. Now, the teacher was convinced this was active learning, because it was hands-on, the children were in groups, but in fact it's not active learning. It is still a teacher giving a lecture and giving all the answers to the pupils. There is no opportunity within that for the pupils to explore the challenge and to find their own answers and the way they work. So I said to the foundation I was working with, let me do this a different way. Tomorrow, bring me a class of children and I will do the same lesson, but one in which active learning becomes a central point. So the children arrived and I divided them into groups. But this time, I simply gave them one bulb. Each group got one bulb. And I said, make the light come on. And the pupils were confused and they said, we only have one light bulb. And I said, so what do you need to make the light bulb come on? Explore the classroom. So they explored the classroom and they found a range of materials and they began to experiment, and very quickly they were making the light bulbs come on. But more than that, they were designing much more complex arrangements because they found several bulbs and lots of wires, and they started creating circuits. So with one battery and a lot of wires, they could make a whole row of light bulbs come on. And in this activity, what was interesting about it is that they all opted for parallel circuits. There's two kinds of circuits here. And because they realized that they were much more robust and much more useful. And by robust, I mean you can take one bulb out, but the others are still working. So I then got them to come up to the board and to draw what they had done, so that they could see. And they all had slightly different versions that you can see here. And each one of this was a drawing by a different group of how they had created their circuits. And we were then able to show them that they had all done parallel circuits and not series circuits. And they said, yes, parallel circuits are much more effective, because they had already worked out that you can remove a bulb there, the others work, but here, if you take that bulb out, all the lights go out. So we said, that's fantastic, that you've done really well. How would you teach parallel circuits and series circuits to other children? And they got back in their groups and they thought about it. And quickly they put up their hand and said, I know how to do it. And this boy got up and he started to give a lecture. And I said, but that's not how you learnt parallel circuits just now. I didn't give you a lecture, I gave you a challenge and you did all the work. And they said, yes, that's right. Because what they are doing here, when I said teach it to other children, is to copy the traditional style of teaching, which is the teacher on the board giving all the answers. So I said, devise a different way of teaching this, which involves the children physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually. So I asked them to come up with an activity which would help them learn circuits in the same way that they learnt in the activity I gave them. And this is what they came up with. They found some masking tape and they created this on the floor. This is the battery, and you imagine that this is a wire that they have put around. And then they got the children to actually act out being the light bulbs. So they put more masking tape to have the wire going across the middle, and then this boy is being the electricity who's running around the circuit, and every time he reaches one of the children, they do that to show that they have lit up like a light bulb and so forth. And this is a parallel circuit which the children are acting out. So they had found a way which was physical, social, emotional, and cognitive to learn how circuits work, and they had demonstrated it by working with the other children in their group. And the best way to learn something is to act it out physically, socially, emotionally, and cognitively. And that was what they were doing.